All right. So, Richard Matheson, I Am Legend. Wow. Okay, so I'm going to say right off the bat, like, this man, I don't think this is his first novel, but this man clearly, this man thought a lot about meaning. I think there's a very enormous conversation, which I imagine has been happening for decades, since '54 when this came out, is that this book really isn't about vampires and the end of the world. You know, I kind of was thinking that about halfway, three quarters of the way through. Just with the portrayal and the spectacle of this book, I just in certain lines and the imagery of his writing at times, sort of portraying the condition that Robert Neville is in. That this man thought a lot about meaning, and that in many ways, is this even about vampires? Is this even about the end of the world? Is this even about this situation in LA where there's this bacteria and people are being infected and then slowly turning into vampires? And it just, yeah, there's just so much that I think pretty blatantly there, that I saw, and I think that people have probably been talking about since this book came out in 1954. You know, um, I think. Well, I think this book is, I think, pretty spectacular, certainly for what it is, and from that time and from certainly the '50s and post World War II. But I think, what was I going to say? I think this book, there's oppression, there's suppression, there's isolation, there's so many different things I think that one could say and talk about as as a component of the portrayal of this story. Beyond obviously the vampire thing. And what came up for me was really two things, and I wonder how much people have spoken about at least one of them. But first is obviously madness, like a guy going fucking crazy, as he's surrounded and unable to go out at night, and there's these vampires that want to kill him every day, or every evening and every night, and he's only allowed to go out in the day. And the madness of that situation and being in that, and as the only human being around, in a decaying in a decaying city of in the decaying city of LA. So there's clearly madness, but what came up for me was that this story is about the bereavement of femininity, with, I'm not going into too much of the details, but what happened to him, his family, his wife, what happens throughout the story, what happens certainly at the end. I really thought that this was about the bereavement of femininity, but not just certainly in one's possible romance or personal relationship, but femininity as a concept and what that means and what happens when there's an absence of femininity, right? The loss of that love, the loss of the loss of that. Uh, you know, let's just say the loss of that, and loss of that thing, and what that absence then creates in its place. Certainly madness, but so much else. Uh, yeah, that was really what came up for me as I was finishing this book, and what imagery and what sort of symbolism and meaning was there by the end. Um, you know, Again, I think I've said this already, but man, holy shit! Like, this guy clearly thought about the meaning of things, with this story, and I really wonder, you know, 70 whatever years ago, uh, or even 80. I don't know when he started thinking about this story. You know, I wonder really if he began thinking about a vampire story, or he began thinking about different themes of, well, different themes, but different themes of being in relation to circumstance and frankly loss. Again, bereavement of femininity is how I define it, but particularly loss. And I wonder how much he thought of that at the beginning, and whether or not, frankly, if he started with these concepts and then found a story about vampires, or was it sort of first, of course, the vampire story, and then these elements began coming out of it. Who knows? The man's passed away. Perhaps you could find interviews, but yeah, who knows? You know, my guess it's probably a mix of both. But I really, really wonder if Mr. Matheson really did think about some of these things, and thought about how could I portray a story of isolation and loss and the madness around that. You know, there were certainly times where I wondered how much of this was certainly based off, obviously not similar circumstances, but similar, frankly, emotional experiences that he then would put into this story, particularly about femininity and relationships, and I'll leave it as that, because I think it's pretty clear. Yeah, what a very interesting story, and no wonder this thing is so damn famous. Like, no wonder. Want to say at the very end here before I quickly leave, like, there again, something else I think that I would like to say is that there are some descriptions in here that are, quite normal, not very vivid, let's say, but then there's times where he writes specific lines about something in Robert Neville's mental condition that just is so striking and comes off the page. There's one that I think, well, it happens numerous times. I definitely can't remember all, but there's one that sort of stuck into my head. I'm not going to repeat it, but there are many, many instances, I think, that are kind of scattered throughout this book that have just some incredible descriptions and depictions of what Robert Neville is going through, and I think it's pretty stunning to think that, or it's pretty stunning to think about him. And it's very, very, I think, revealing about the man's writing capability, because it is a bit of a mix. Like, there's some simplistic lines and simplistic writing, but then he does sort of invoke this much more revealing, and then he invokes much more when he evokes a greater sort of encompassment of imagery at times. And I think that really stood out a lot with me at this book, is that there is this back and forth of, okay, he's describing a scene, he's going through some things, he's portraying Neville, like, or Robert here, it's fine, and then there's these moments where the imagery is just so palpable regarding his mental state. Anyways, totally recommend. I think this is one of those old school books. Well, old school, but those books from back in the day. I think if you don't read this, you are missing out. I don't think this thing is outdated at this point. Like, it is from the 50s, and perhaps, if you don't like those old books, so be it. Like, read whatever you wish. But I think it's completely fine, and it does hold up. It's not a difficult read. What a line, what a story, what a title. I Am Legend. Okay, cool. All right, peace out.